Gracias por asistir a este info meeting y presentación oficial del UFM Law Liberty Circle. Es el lanzamiento oficial de una nueva aventura intelectual en la Casa de la Libertad de la Universidad Francisco Marroquín. Nuestro proyecto denominado UFM Law Liberty Circle marca el inicio de una nueva etapa en la universidad y representa una oportunidad singular para personas que con gran interés académico y profesional deseen profundizar y defender los principios éticos, jurídicos y económicos de una sociedad de personas libres y responsables. En esta presentación oficial tenemos dos invitados distinguidos, la vicerrectora de la universidad, Eleanor T. Ely, que ha sido un motor importante en la promoción de este proyecto, y al profesor y el doctor Alan Mendelhall, que nos acompaña en el día de hoy. Antes de introducirlos a ellos, y estoy briefly speaking Spanish, ¿no? Me permito dar un contexto sobre el proyecto. Este proyecto es una oportunidad valiosa para estudiantes, profesores, abogados y jueces y magistrados y fiscales en Guatemala. Además de los campus donde la universidad tiene influencia también, Madrid o Panamá, donde la universidad tiene un alcance directo. El UFM Law Liberty Circle es un espacio inédito, posible, gracias a un acuerdo con el International Law and Liberty Society. La ILLS es una red multinacional de grupos no partidistas formada por abogados, estudiantes de derecho, profesores de derecho y jueces, que fue creada recientemente, inspirada y en solidaridad con the Federalist Society for Law and Public Policy Studies. En estas breves palabras, quisiera destacar que en este lanzamiento oficial, 3 puntos. 1, la importancia de the International Law and Liberty Society, que luego explicará la vicerrectora Eleanor T. Ely, y de nuestra querida Universidad Francisco Marroquín. 2, el agradecimiento a the International Law and Liberty Society. Y 3, a the Federalist Society for Law and Public Policy Studies. Y por supuesto, el agradecimiento a las autoridades de la Universidad Francisco Marroquín, al licenciado Ricardo Castillo Arenales, rector de la universidad, a su vicerrectora Eleanor T. Ely por su apoyo decisivo y por supuesto agradecer una mención especial al profesor Alan Mendelhall, que fue el primero que escuchó esta idea y que me ayudó también a materializarle. Lo mismo, evidentemente, haré con Jim Kelly, del cual hablaré más adelante. Alan Mendelhall, que nos hablará más adelante, es además de miembro de Federalist Society, es además Associate Dean y Grady Rosier Professor en el Sorrell College of Business y director ejecutivo del Manuel Johnson Center for Political Economy. Y además fue quien escuchó mi primer acercamiento a esta idea en Las Vegas. Y gracias a ti, Allen, por todo tu apoyo a la universidad. Conforme a mi primer punto, destaco que el UFM Law Liberty Circle es el primer círculo en América Española que colabora estrechamente con the International Law and Liberty Society, una organización recientemente creada e inspirada por the Federalist Society. Para quienes desconocen la trayectoria de the Federalist Society, en adelante FedSoc, que es como se conoce en los ambientes más populares, debo señalar que es una organización de gran relieve e importancia en los Estados Unidos en el ámbito jurídico. Gracias al talento y dedicación de James P. Kelly III, director de Asuntos Internacionales de the Federalist Society, el ILLS ha tenido un alcance internacional. La Federalist Society fue fundada en 1982 y ha jugado un papel fundamental en la promoción de un enfoque textualista y originalista de la Constitución, influyendo en la jurisprudencia de los Estados Unidos. Fuera de los Estados Unidos, el enfoque textualista y originalista de la Constitución es prácticamente desconocido, aunque en ciertos círculos académicos se asocia en gran medida a autores como Robert Bork, Antonin Scalia, Raúl Berger y Edwin Meese. De hecho, a partir de la obra de Scalia, lo que se conoce como el original public meaning de la Constitución ha influido decisivamente no solo en la académica, sino también en el ámbito judicial. Jueces de la Corte Suprema de los Estados Unidos actualmente, como Amy Coney Barrett, Clarence Thomas y Neil Gorsuch, entre otros, son miembros decisivos de esta asociación. Muchos académicos y jueces y fiscales en los Estados Unidos también forman parte de the Federalist Society y siguen el enfoque originalista y textualista de la Constitución. Cabe destacar que uno de los aspectos más interesantes de FedSoc es que sus miembros no necesariamente comparten los puntos de vista ideológicos. Y de hecho, hay originalistas e incluso progresistas como el profesor Akhil Amar, que siendo o no miembros de FedSoc tienen posturas diferentes, pero defienden el enfoque originalista. Aunque la mayoría son conservadores, libertarios y liberales clásicos, todos están unidos por una pasión común, esto es, la defensa de los principios del Estado de Derecho y de la Constitución. Esta pasión intelectual por la defensa de estos principios coincide con la misión de la Universidad Francisco Marroquín e incluso pudiéramos decir que hay un precursor de estas ideas en el propio Yao al enfocar que hay un original intent o intención original en la propia fundación de la universidad. Una de las razones que me impulsó a materializar este proyecto es que considero que Yao había suscrito completamente esta iniciativa. En su momento, en sus memorias, resaltó la importancia del derecho, llegando a sostener que era vital estudiar sus fundamentos unido a un fuerte énfasis en el derecho positivo. En efecto, Manuel Yao en sus memorias criticó cualquier enfoque sociológico y abogó porque todos los cursos sobre derecho positivo y la práctica del derecho siempre incluyeran un énfasis en la teoría jurídica. De hecho, ahí surge la pregunta, ¿cuál era la teoría del derecho que tenía Manuel Yao en mente? Aunque dudo que Yao suscribiera del todo los puntos de vista del derecho natural o del positivismo jurídico, de hecho no era abogado, pero sí que entendía muy bien que una vez plasmado un documento normativo como los documentos fundacionales de la Universidad Francisco Marroquín, era fundamental preservar la intención original de sus fundadores. Para Yao, el ideario, la política educativa de la universidad y el discurso inaugural que condensa la filosofía política y económica ratificada por los fiduciarios, fundadores y benefactores originales debía preservarse para evitar desviaciones de los propósitos originales de la institución. Llegó a insinuar que estos documentos deberían leerse en cierta forma como un libro sagrado, en el sentido de que era la única forma de mantenerse fieles a la intención original. No me cabe duda de que Yao tenía clara esta cuestión, no solo en relación con la UFM, sino que también respecta en la vida jurídica e institucional. De hecho, otorgó los únicos 2 doctorados de la Universidad Francisco Marroquín en Derecho a destacados académicos como Henry Manny y Edwin Means III, quienes han sido miembros distinguidos de FedSoc. Los interesados pueden incluso disfrutar las brillantes conferencias de Henry Manny en el repositorio de UFM New Media. Para terminar, para preservar ese original intent y frente a las amenazas a la sociedad libre, el convenio con the International Law Liberty Society es una oportunidad para que nuestro campus, tanto la Facultad de Derecho, la Escuela de Posgrado, la Escuela de Estudios Políticos, la Escuela de Negocios, hagan saber a sus estudiantes sobre este círculo, ofreciéndoles un foro de debate y discusión. FedSoc nació del impulso a estudiantes y hoy en día cuenta con miles de estudiantes, profesores y jueces a lo largo y ancho de todos los Estados Unidos. Este espacio académico es fundamental para que una región como la nuestra, tan alejada del rule of law, se discuta la importancia del Estado de Derecho, la libertad individual, la responsabilidad individual, el gobierno limitado, la separación de poderes, la restricción judicial, la libertad económica, la propiedad privada, la subsidiariedad y las libertades individuales. En el UFM Law Liberty Circle se fomentará el debate crítico sobre el Estado de Derecho, explorando sus raíces históricas y sus implicaciones modernas, con la misma fuerza y energía de aquel pequeño grupo de personas que creó el Centro de Estudios Económicos y Sociales CES, que hizo posible la fundación de la Universidad Francisco Marroquín. Esperemos que todos retomemos el ímpetu de los improvisadores rebeldes para seguir en la lucha por un mundo más inclinado hacia ideas clásicas, liberales, libertarias o conservadoras, pero sobre todo para crear un espacio donde en el futuro podamos decir, como dijo una magistrada de la Corte Suprema de Justicia, en cierta forma, Elena Kagan, "In that way we are all originalists", y así frenar el progresismo jurídico que con su reescritura de la Constitución ha debilitado las pocas instituciones que tenemos en América hispana. Muchas gracias a todos y agradezco nuevamente a la vicerrectora Lenore Ely, al profesor Alan Mendenhall y James T. Kelly y a todas las autoridades de la universidad. Please, Vice President Lenore Ely, thank you so much.
I won't be as eloquent as Professor Alvarado. That was very nice introduction to the project. But I'm very, very pleased to be here with you all today, and I'm pleased to see you here. I want to start simply by asking you a couple of questions. We're not going to answer them, but I would like for you to think about how you might answer them. First, is Guatemala, I would think September 15th is coming. That's a very important day for Guatemala. Is Guatemala a republic or a democracy? And why does it matter? When Guatemalan legislators are legislating, are they making legislation or are they making law? Why does it matter that we understand the difference? When an institution such as CICIG that operated in Guatemala for many years creates interactions between Guatemalan authorities, other authorities, international authorities, what's the status of those contracts or arrangements? How is law operationalized in those instances? And is it the same thing as creating justice? So what's the difference between law and justice? These are the kinds of questions. I think you've been given a copy of Bruno Leone's The Law, and I think this is a great fun place to start. Bruno Leone is writing about the law, not Guatemalan law or necessarily French law. He's writing about the law. What does that mean? I'm inspired by the UFM philosophy statement, and I hope all the students here are very familiar with it, but it says we shouldn't learn just the technical aspects of our career, but we should learn the theoretical aspects of our career. And I think that the new Law and Liberty Circle here at UFM will give you an opportunity to meet with those who want to dig deeper and think about those theoretical aspects of the profession that you've chosen or the vocation that you practice as a teacher. So I'm very excited for this. We're here tonight because Jesus Maria and my friend Alan Mendenhall were talking one evening, and Jesus Maria said, I would love to have a Federalist Society chapter in Guatemala. And I was, well, they're just starting an international program. So I had the opportunity in May to be in London, England with members and directors of 18 other international law and liberty circles that are being formed. It was an amazing network. Organizers from Germany, from Great Britain, from Italy, from Spain, from Australia, from Singapore, from Korea. So I got to meet wonderful young lawyers realizing that law is under attack everywhere in our world. And to defend it, we need to understand it and to love it. And so it was a really fun experience to get to be there, to see, and then to come back and work with Dr. Alvarado to bring this opportunity to you, to Guatemala, and to let you know that Guatemala is the first Law and Liberty Circle in Latin America. And so the people who start this circle will also be thinking about setting a precedent for other Latin American, Ibero-American programs to think about these questions, which I think are very important. So I'd like to take a moment and introduce Dr. Mendenhall. Dr. Mendenhall is the associate professor of the dean of the business school at Troy University, but he's beyond that an attorney. He was an attorney and trained as an attorney, also has a PhD in English, and he's been well practiced, but here, his claim to fame is he has probably the most active lawyers chapter of the Federalist Society in the United States. And he's here especially for this launch event to also coach us about how to make our chapter this active as he's been able to do in the United States, and also to tell you a little bit about why, as either a student, a professor, or a practicing attorney, this network will be really great, and the experiences that you can have will be really wonderful. So to participate, and it will be what you make of it together. So Dr. Mendenhall, I'd like to invite you up.
In the United States, we tell lawyer jokes. Lawyers aren't that popular. They enjoy a lot of prestige, but people tend to dislike lawyers. So you'll hear people say things like, well, how do you know the difference between a dead lawyer and a dead snake on the highway? Well, there's skid marks before the snake because people wanted to hit the brakes. They don't brake before they hit the lawyer. Or what's the difference between a lawyer and a catfish? One's a scum-sucking bottom feeder and the other one's a fish. You get used to these things as a lawyer in the United States. The Federalist Society is very important to me personally. So as a student and undergraduate, I actually leaned left and didn't discover economics until later. I graduated from college. My first day of college was actually 9/11. It was the very first day of class. I walked out of philosophy and somebody said, did you hear what happened? These planes hit the World Trade Center. And I I'm embarrassed to admit, didn't even really know what the World Trade Center was. And and came back from my dorm room and saw planes hitting this building and saw people jumping out. And it was really a profound way to start your college. I mean, literally my first day of class, because Furman University, where I went, started later than everybody else. And as a result of that, there was a sort of fervent bellicosity among the students. Everyone wanted revenge, and everyone was kind of scared. People didn't know what to make of this. They didn't know how compromised our national security was. And I found myself opposed to the Iraq War. And I was very opposed to it at the time. And I thought that made me a person of the left. I just didn't realize that there was a rich tradition of libertarianism, of conservatism, that would have agreed with me. And it took time to work through things. After I graduated from college, I moved to Japan and taught English there, and actually discovered Mises and Hayek while I was living in Japan, started reading them, started reading Russell Kirk, and eventually worked my way to whatever types of positions I hold now. But when I joined law school, I went to West Virginia University for law school. And as I say, this was a time when I was still working through ideas. And some point during my 1L, 2L year, I realized I am not on the left at all. I was completely wrong about myself. My ideas actually hadn't changed that much. It's just that I came to understand that what I believed about certain things wasn't actually a leftist position at all. And as I discovered economics, I started to think in a new way about a new field to me at least, in which I had no training, and that was very eye-opening. And the opportunity arose to start a Federalist Society chapter at that law school, which at the time did not have a law school chapter. And I had two friends. Their names were Dan Casto and Matt Clark. And the Federalist Society reached out to one of the three of us, maybe all three of us, I don't remember, the details are hazy because it's been a while, about starting this chapter. And we decided to do it. So we founded a chapter there, and we brought together new students, and we started inviting speakers. And that's how the chapter at West Virginia University College of Law started. Then I went on and I did more school, and I practiced law in Atlanta. And I was practicing law in Atlanta and trying to get my PhD at the same time. And for those of you who've practiced law, you know that billing hours and writing dissertation are not compatible activities. There's just not enough time to bill hours, keep your clients happy, and write a dissertation. And I had an opportunity to move to Alabama to be a staff attorney for the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. So I jumped on that opportunity. I was getting my PhD at Auburn University, which is in Alabama. And so I was able to live in Auburn, very close to my dissertation committee, but also close to my job. And it was a wonderful arrangement. I finished my PhD during that time. But I learned shortly into the job that the Montgomery chapter had died out. So Montgomery, Alabama is the capital of the state. And it had enjoyed a robust chapter for a long time. The Attorney General, Bill Pryor, who had been nominated to federal court, he's now still an 11th Circuit judge. He's one of the feeder judges, a judge that sends his clerks up to the Supreme Court. So many people who clerk for Pryor go on to clerk for Justice Thomas, for instance. Well, when he was Attorney General, this chapter was robust, it was active, but it had since fallen away when Judge Pryor sat on the bench. He moved to Birmingham. One of his successors left to go work for the Heritage Foundation, and then somebody else took over after him and basically held no events after that. And so the chapter died out, and I said, well, I've done this once. Why can't I do this again? So in June 2013, I founded our Federalist Society chapter in Montgomery, and we have had monthly luncheons ever since then. And what I like about these is that, Edmund Burke talks about little platoons, and Alexis de Tocqueville, having visited the United States in the 19th century, observed the mediating institutions, the small associations, the civic life that really defined the American experience. And there's not a lot of that left in the United States. We sort of live in this managerial, bureaucratic state. The administrative agencies have their tentacles in everything. And as a result, civic life has been on the decline. But there are exceptions, and I think our Federalist Society chapter is one such exception. We get together, as I say, every month. This month we're doing a dinner on the 24th, and we're having a panel. We're having 2 medical doctors participate with a foster care worker and a law professor to talk about an issue of in vitro fertilization, which is hot on the election trail right now, and it's a big issue in Alabama because there was an Alabama Supreme Court decision that was handed down about a year ago that was fairly controversial. So it's an important topic. And what ought we to be doing when we have important topics facing us in our civil discourse? We should be talking about them, and we should be bringing together the experts to really inform us about those issues. And that's why we're having medical doctors come in to give us a medical perspective. This is somewhat unusual for us. We haven't quite done that. We've had non-attorneys come in. For example, we've had historians come in and talk about the Second Amendment and things like that. But this is our first sort of medical meeting, so that will be exciting. The other thing that's interesting about the Federalist Society, and Jesus Maria, you did a great introduction. You probably said some of the things that I was planning to say, but the Federalist Society was founded in 1982, primarily at Ivy League institutions for students. But now it has lawyers chapters. I think there are over 70,000 lawyers who are members in the United States of the Federalist Society. And then another 20,000 between faculty and students and sort of other members who are non-lawyers who still join the Federalist Society, because the Federalist Society won't turn away your money. If you want to join it and you're not a lawyer, guess what? They'll let you do it. They'll take your check. But the Federalist Society's motto is that the state exists to preserve freedom, the separation of government powers is central to our Constitution, and that it is emphatically the province and duty of the judiciary to say what the law is, not what it should be. So in the 1980s, textualism and originalism were just nascent theories. They were just starting up. And they were a big reaction to the Warren Court from the 1960s. And people thought, oh, these Supreme Court justices are activist judges. They're making law. And as a response, some scholars and judges carved out new ideas, and they were not fully formed. So in the early ages, you would hear people talk about original intent, originalism. Well, what was the problem about original intent, originalism? Well, a legislature consists of numerous people with multiple perspectives who are voting for several reasons. And so it's a fiction to suggest that a legislative body could have some sort of single intent. A legislature does not have an intent. So to get around this problem, scholars started thinking, well, we really need to focus on original public meaning. And the reason why this is important is because it is to preserve democracy. Because we want to know when our legislature is passing a law, that law will in fact be respected and observed 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 25 years down the road. That's the point of the legislative process. But if we think that judges can come in and correct the law as they see fit rather than striking it down, or add to the law, or even promulgate law, then judges are exercising the legislative function, but they don't have the same accountability as the legislative branch, as the people who are voted in. They can't be voted out. There are mechanisms in American law for removing judges, impeachment, and there are state court judges. For example, in Alabama, our judges are elected, so you can vote them out. But judges aren't supposed to be exercising the legislative function. They're not supposed to be making law. That's actually anti-democratic. And so this theory of textualism, this theory of originalism, which holds that the original public meaning is what the law is, gained traction as a democratic theory. So what does original public meaning mean in terms of interpretation? It means when you look at the law, you have to consult dictionaries and reference books and legal textbooks and other cases and other jurisdictions that use the same terms to ascertain how a word was commonly understood at the time it was issued by those who issued it. because words do evolve over time. So a word may have a particular context in 1792, and its meaning may mean something different in 1982. And that's why you need the context. You need to examine the context to understand what was it this legislature was trying to accomplish at the moment that it enacted this particular law. When the Federalist Society first started, the first 20 years probably, it was something of a liability for people to be considered conservative or libertarian. And faculty would say, okay, you can join this thing called the Federalist Society, just don't put it on your resume because that you might not get hired. And now, in a Republican administration at least, if you want to be nominated to a federal judgeship, it's almost a prerequisite. If you have not been a member of the Federalist Society, or if the Federalist Society tells the President of the United States when he asks, hey, this person is nominally a member of the Federalist Society, but doesn't do anything. They just signed up to just have that Federalist Society on their resume. And that's actually the Federalist Society's problem now, is that it's so popular and so influential that it has to, within its membership, distinguish who's actually an authentic member and who's joining just to gain a career advantage, who actually believes in the principles that we teach, and who's just here to ride coattails. And that presents a different problem. Now, interestingly enough, as president of the Montgomery chapter, during the last Republican administration, I got phone calls from people in the Department of Justice and the White House, because we had seats vacant in the Middle District of Alabama, and we had seats vacant in the 11th Circuit. And those questions went along the lines of, hey, this person alleges that he participated in the Federalist Society. What did he do? Did he come to your meetings? Did he do this, do that? And in fact, in the examples given, they all did. And actually, the person who was my vice president got nominated to the Middle District of Alabama, and roughly 6 months later, at like the age of 37 or 38, got elevated to the 11th Circuit, which is, this is a lifetime appointment. He gets this job for life, and when he retires, he gets salary for life for this position. It's a very, very important position. Another funny thing that would happen is during that time, because of my involvement in the Federalist Society, the ABA, the American Bar Association, does its own evaluation of judges and how they, how qualified they are. But then the FBI does background checks. And I remember going out to lunch one time and coming back, and my assistant was looking at me, and she's like, the FBI called and was wanting to talk to you. And she was like, this is kind of weird. I was like, no, don't worry. This is about vetting a judicial nominee. I'm not in trouble, don't worry. But the Federalist Society does no lobbying. It takes no positions. And in fact, it's famous for inviting people from diverse perspectives on panels. So at the National Lawyers Convention, takes place every November, you'll see a panel, and it will have 3 very bright conservatives or libertarians, but it will always have an extremely bright person from the left on that panel, because that person keeps everybody honest. That person keeps it from being an echo chamber. That person keeps everybody thinking more rigorously about the position, so that they actually have to defend their positions in public. They're not just preaching to the choir, as it were. 90% of the Federalist Society's funding comes from just individuals and foundations, and then another 10% from corporations. And of the 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices in the United States, 6 were Federalist Society members. There's a question about John Roberts. He denies that he was a member, but he was listed as being on the steering committee of the D.C. chapter. So, I think John Roberts is one of those people that tries to be as non-controversial as possible and tries to unify left and right, sometimes at the expense of principles. I realize I probably said that on recording, but I'll stand by it. But Justice Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Thomas, Alito, Amy Coney Barrett, they were all proud members of the Federalist Society. And it's about building interlocking networks. In our chapter, which is in Montgomery, the state capitol, we have a lot of government attorneys. We have a lot of people from the Attorney General's office. We meet in the Alabama Supreme Court. We used to meet in the Capital City Club, which was at the top of a building, but that place actually closed. So now we meet in the Alabama Supreme Court. So we get a lot of the justices and their staff, a lot of judges. The Birmingham chapter is much different. It's a sort of a financial hub. It's a big metropolis. Their meetings consist of mostly private practitioners and people at law firms. Huntsville is a little different. It's a mix. Huntsville is almost a federal satellite. It's where all these NASA buildings are, and they've got all this space stuff and engineering. And so you get an interesting mix of federal attorneys and private practitioners. And I actually spoke to the Huntsville chapter earlier this year, and there were several judges there as well. What these informal networks do is enable the sort of informal cultivation of strategies, because you all sit around a table with people and you start, thinking about, well, what are we going to do about this problem? How are we going to address that problem? And people talk and people come up with ideas, and they may not solve the problem over their cheesecake, but they get the conversation started and they say, you know what, let's connect on this later. I really like that idea. And the Federalist Society chapter tends to have really the smartest attorneys. I mean, basically, all the Ivy League educated attorneys in Montgomery are Federalist Society members. There are a few Ivy League JDs who are on the left that are in Montgomery, but not very many. And they all tend to gravitate toward the Federalist Society because of the high level of discourse. It's about cultivating ideas and thought and about the philosophy of law. Very few places do you get judges together talking about things like the rule of law and natural law and what these mean on an everyday basis for their job. As Jesus Maria mentioned, during Allegra Kagan's confirmation hearing in 2010, she was quoted as saying, now basically we're all originalists. Ketanji Brown Jackson in 2022 professed to be an originalist. These are judges, now justices, on the left who are adopting what was crafted to be a distinctly conservative jurisprudence. That's how influential the Federalist Society has been, that now virtually every federal judge who wants to be confirmed, to get confirmed, you have to go through these Senate confirmation hearings. If you want to be confirmed, even on the left, you have to at least pay lip service to originalism or textualism, because there's really no other game in town. There is no other judicial philosophy. Justice Ginsburg had this amorphous idea about, evolving jurisprudence or, a jurisprudence that grows, but there's nothing to that. If law is just mutability, fungibility, the possibility of change, then what does it even mean? How do you put any faith in the legislative process if what gets enacted as law by the people you vote into office could be something entirely different in 5 or 6 years because a judge determines it to be so? I'm excited about this chapter of the Federalist Society in particular, and these international iterations or versions or variations of the Federalist Society are called Law and Liberty chapters. But I'm excited about this one in particular because of UFM. UFM is such a special place with such a unique history. I have one of my former students and graduate assistants sitting here who's a graduate of UFM. My current graduate assistant right now back in the United States is a UFM graduate. I have a great affection for this place. It's such a unique place. It's a beautiful place. It's a profoundly inspiring place. I was telling Jesus Maria earlier, you probably get used to coming here every day and going to work, and it's a job. But for me, it's like magical to walk into this campus and be struck by the beauty of it and to see all the students, the hustle bustle, the activity. We went through the library and there were students studying all over the place, even though class was out. That's really a profound thing to observe. There are chapters in London, Oxford, Paris, Madrid, Barcelona, Munich, Budapest, Warsaw, Sydney, Manila, you name it. There are a lot of them out there. But none of them have an anchor like UFM. Oxford certainly isn't UFM. There's a Madrid campus, so maybe y'all can start claiming Madrid, claim your Madrid chapter there. But, there's nothing quite like UFM to be the anchor for this chapter. And you have a law school, and there's such an opportunity both in the academic setting, but also in society writ large through these spaces, because I've seen what the Federalist Society is capable of doing, and it doesn't even have to be the Federalist Society itself. It can be just the purposeful gathering of people. That's how UFM got started. It's exactly how UFM got started. And how awesome would it be if UFM could create something in the legal space that could influence the culture and society and politics here the way the Federalist Society has in the United States. I just think that would be amazing, and I can think of no better place than UFM for that to happen. So thank you for having me here to see the birth of something really special. I'm excited for you, I'm excited for Law and Liberty, I'm excited for the Federalist Society, and I'm excited for Guatemala. Thank you.
But my question to you is, what role do you think that institutions like the UFM or the Federalist Society can have, especially by implementing the rule of law or defending democracy in a third world country, especially like Guatemala in Latin America? And what are the main obstacles that you believe that we might face while doing so?
Well, I'm probably not as equipped as the people in this room to address the obstacles because I'm not on the ground here and familiar with politics. I know you had a very controversial election recently, and you're probably still dealing with some of the aftermath of that. But the Federalist Society is pretty diverse. So in the student chapters, you have typically speakers coming in quite regularly to talk, or students will facilitate debates. And I'll pick sort of a less controversial issue. Let's say they'll pick somebody to take the position that judges should be elected, and they'll take somebody that should that advocates for judges to be appointed, and they'll debate that issue. That's a pretty vanilla issue to throw out there as an example. And I think that encourages reflection, that encourages thought, and I think debate is really, really important. In the United States, debate is kind of breaking down on college campuses. Young people, and not just young people, faculty too, are less capable of maintaining civil dialogue, of being able to disagree constructively. And that's problematic because people tend to gravitate towards the other people with whom they agree, and then they're only having conversations among themselves. And there are opportunities lost in that bifurcation. And I think the Federalist Society's model of facilitating constructive debate ensures that we live in a society that can have fracture, but also conversation, number one, but also can facilitate the advancement of ideas and making sure that people do diversify their perspectives. It doesn't mean that people have to necessarily change their minds, but in order to have a stronger basis for your opinion, you have to subject it to scrutiny. You have to, you have to have your beliefs challenged. And if you can't defend your own beliefs, it's questionable whether you actually even believe them. If you can't defend them, do you actually believe them? It's sort of a thing to think about. Now that's on the student level. On the faculty level, the Federalist Society hosts conferences, so faculty will get together for that. Federalist Society partners with Liberty Fund, and we'll do Liberty Fund colloquia. Faculty are many of the speakers for the student chapters, so some faculty will go from one law school to another. And then there are the lawyers chapters, and there are two sort of versions of that. There are the practice divisions, and these are led by people who are very trusted, long-standing members of the Federalist Society, and they may run a practice group on one particular area of law, let's just say, just hypothetically, intellectual property. And so the Federalist Society Intellectual Property Group will meet for its weekly webinar. And that way, the lawyers in New York can talk to the lawyers in New Orleans and can talk to the lawyers in Miami, and they can all sort of hash out whatever problem they're having with the issue of the day. And then the National Lawyers Convention brings sort of all of these elements together, the students, the faculty, the attorneys, so that they're all in one place, and you get a wide variety of speakers. You know, Senator Mike Lee may speak, and then you may have a Supreme Court justice. I know I've heard Justice Alito speak at meetings before, and then that may be followed by Professor Richard Epstein at NYU or John McGinnis, and it gives you a nice variety to hear all that. We actually had just last Thursday and Friday, we had our Alabama State Chapters Conference. And that's where all the chapters, which are in, there's Birmingham, Mobile, Montgomery, and Huntsville. So we have 4 chapters. But we all came together as a state and had our statewide conference. And all the federal judges show up. And I mentioned that in Alabama, our state judges are elected. So they all show up because if you're not seen there, you risk not getting reelected. But we had practitioners on the panels, we had professors on the panels, we had judges on the panels, and we had one politician, one member of our House of Representatives on a panel. And all of this continues to not just bring people together, but bring people together around ideas, which is important in a society where in Alabama, at least typically to get people to come together like that, you need a football game. And if you don't have a football game, you're unlikely to get that many people in a room for anything else. Maybe a wedding or a funeral. But so it's nice to get people together to actually talk about what really is lasting, what really is more permanent, what will matter in 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, ideas. As much as I hate to admit it, in 300 years, nobody's going to care what Auburn University's football record is this year. Actually, that probably will be a good thing because we're off to a bad start. But the ideas will persist because society is shaped by ideas.
First of all, thank you very much for your speech. I'm here currently a first-year law student at UFM. And my question basically, I agree with you that debate, speech, sharing ideas is really important. But I think that the big fear in Latin America, just in general, is the persecution of ideas, in that we see President Lula banning Twitter, former, like right now X. We see journalists speaking out on X and being exiled from the country here in Guatemala. We see a big fear of people trying to bring out new ideas that go against the political elite. We see these institutional barriers that prevent you from speaking out, trying to bring rather unpopular ideas. I think the biggest fear for private universities such as UFM into trying to enter the political sphere, political institutions, is that there's a big fear of political breakdown, hunting you down for those ideas. They will not let you speak out. So my question is, I understand that in the United States, with all the freedoms that the Constitution endows on them, that maybe speaking out freely in the United States or in Europe in general, or even in my country, Korea, is different. But in developing countries like in Guatemala, at least my theory is that there are possible repercussions that may live on us living in Guatemala for ideas that may or may not be correct. I have no clear judgment on what those ideas may be, for better or worse, good for the country. But I think it's that inherent fear of political repercussion, given the history of Latin America in general, being kicked out, being beaten down on newspapers nationwide. I think that bigger fear is what prevents academics, possible people who can bring positive change to this country, that prevents this type of discourse, prevents this type of interconnectivity that might change, hopefully, the entire region for good. How would you deal with this?
Well, thank you for that perspective. That's very profound. I guess I'll say a couple things. The first is that debate is particularly important for a Federalist Society meeting, because when you have different perspectives clashing, nobody can accuse you of having taken a particular position with a meeting. No one can say this meeting was set up to advance this particular agenda. And let people determine for themselves which position they think was better argued. The second thing I'll say is, I guess, a little more stark, which is that I think we all as human beings have an obligation to tell the truth and to say what we believe in. And that sometimes can come at great risk. And unfortunately, not everybody lives in a society that's as free as another society. And so we always have to navigate the landscape in which we live. People have to be prudent, and they have to choose their words carefully. But it's really up to every individual to make a decision for himself or herself what type of person he or she wants to be. When you live your life, which is a very short life, we don't live very long. The time on earth is pretty brief. But when it comes to the end, do you want to be the person who was a coward, or do you want to be the person who pursued truth, facts, reality with all your heart and all your mind? And for me, I've made my decision, and there were times when I did things that were very scary. I launched, at the time, I launched something and I branded it as an anti-woke business program. And it was scary. No universities had done anything like this. And I thought, well, here goes. Wonder how long till I get fired. And I was expecting massive blowback. But instead, people came out of the woodwork. People at other universities said, hey, I could never do that at my university, but let me just tell you, I'm so glad you did it at yours, because it's encouraging to know that other people are willing to do that. Then I started hearing from CEOs and business leaders and attorneys. And before I knew it, I realized, you know what? There are a lot of people who are scared. There are a lot of people who actually believe the same thing and think the same thing, but they're too scared to say anything. And if I hadn't said anything, they would never come to it. And now I'm hosting a whole conference next month of mostly people I met because I said something. And those people never would have been in the same room if I had just said nothing. Again, I don't want to encourage recklessness. Everybody has to be prudent about the choices they make. But at the same time, truth is too important. It's too important for the long view to disregard it or to be quiet about it.
I was wondering, what are your views on what we'd be doing with Law and Liberty International? Do you see it as something, what sort of topics do you imagine we could talk about? There's a continental law tradition, which we belong to, and yours is more common law. And so what do you think we could talk in common? I'd be interested to know what your views on that is.
Well, the beautiful thing about our Federalist Society chapter meetings is that every month, so I run the Montgomery chapters. Every month I get to choose the speaker. And it's pretty much, despite my political leanings, it's pretty much a dictatorship in that chapter. But that's mainly because nobody else will do the work. It's not because I've led some kind of coup d'etat and taken over and I'm some kind of ruling as a tyrant. It's because everybody else is too busy. But we do something different every month. One month we may talk about North Korea. The next month we may talk about the Second Amendment. Like I said, this month we've got IVF. We had Jeff Sessions come and talk about his career and his time serving as Attorney General. Sometimes we'll have judges come and talk. We have every year, so you have to get continuing legal education credits. So lawyers have to get 12 hours of this every year. If you go to our luncheons every single month, you get your 12 hours. But it's required that you get 1 hour of ethics every year. So, of course, every year I have one speaker who comes in and talks about judicial ethics. And it could be, the new state bar rule for lawyers advertising. Sometimes it's more mundane stuff. It's not all about natural law. It's not all about saving the world. It's not all about high levels of jurisprudence. Sometimes it's very much about practical issues. We've had the director of the Alabama State Bar come in and give basically a state of the bar speech, talking about this is where the Alabama bar stands, this is what our funding levels are. So, I think really any variety of things, anybody who's practicing in a particular area can come and talk about recent developments of the law. Obviously, some of that more high-level stuff should occur, I think, where you're talking about what is it that our judiciary is doing? What are our judges doing right? What are our judges doing wrong? And what types of reform might be possible? I think there's always a place for that kind of stuff. But then, there's also a place for examining what legal education is. We've had multiple talks about what a law school is supposed to be doing. Are law schools supposed to be training up practitioners? Is there more to it? Should the law degree be shorter in the United States? Should it be longer? I mean, these are all things that we talk about. So I think the possibilities really are roughly endless. I mean, the one thing about law that's fascinating to me is it touches every conceivable zone of human activity. There is nothing that a person does that is not in some way governed by law at some level. The law touches every action. And so that being the case, I think the possibilities are pretty much endless.
Solo unas breves palabras finales. Agradecerles el que hayan venido. Esto es como remarcar lo que decía el profesor Mendelhoff de la cultura de la asociación. No hay nada obligado y mucha gente nos va a ver y se va a interesar en el programa. Vamos a tener una landing page donde vamos a exponer un poco en qué consiste el programa y además pueden registrarse, pedir información y afiliarse. Para el programa creo que también es necesaria la energía, your energy. El profesor Mendelhoff hoy viajó de Alabama y está aquí con nosotros, almorzamos y ya vieron cómo está, como que si se acaba de levantar. Entonces necesitamos esa energía para poder seguir discutiendo. Y la cuarta cosa es un poco recordar lo que habíamos hablado en la presentación. Es básicamente un programa que, como han dicho la vicerrectora y el profesor Mendelhoff, lo que pretende es ser como una especie de club de discusión en el que la gente interesada pueda discutir sobre un tema que quizás, como algunos han expuesto, es parte del declive un poco de la América Latina, la situación del derecho, del Estado de Derecho, de la debilidad institucional y todo ello conforme a lo que es el ideario básico de la universidad, que es eso, difundir los principios éticos, jurídicos y económicos de una sociedad de personas libres y responsables. El ILLS se llama así, entre otras cosas, por el problema a partir de una pregunta. Es Federalist Society no pega fuera de Estados Unidos. No todos los países son federalistas. Entonces, cada capítulo, y especialmente el de la UFM, que está básicamente ligado a nuestros estatutos, lo que pretende es eso, un espacio pequeño de discusión sobre la cultura del rule of law y sus principios. Así que muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much for your participation, and thank you so much for the Vice President Lena Reilly, and good afternoon. Thank you.